12 and a half years after the famous campfire in the Whiskey Villa in Rüdenau, we are here again with David Hynes, our spiritus rector from Ireland, our most famous master distiller and whiskey industry instigator.
Not really.
What do we have here? We have a St. Kilian whiskey, single cask, peated ex-port wine, ruby. Yeah, it's from a collection called The Soul of St. Kilian, volume 17. It's a secret collection. Very interesting stuff. You see the color, David.
But you certainly are an innovator.
Well, thanks to Mario and the team, obviously.
Yeah. The Wizard of Wood.
So we have something very nice today to make a slunchy. To make a slunchy, how we say in Rüdenau.
A toast.
Slunchy.
To the last campfire.
Yes,
to the famous campfire.
To you, David. Thank you.
And you, without you, nothing. Actually, yeah, that was a dream then, wasn't it?
It was a kind of dream, yeah. I think it was in November, November 2011, when you participated in the Inter Whiskey as a presenter from Cooley.
Yeah.
And you presented the first version of the famous Connemara Turf Moor, the ultra heavily peated whiskey. One of my favorite ones. I still keep some bottles unopened, a few ones.
There was a while there when they were talking about discontinuing it because they couldn't get enough peated malt.
And I asked you to come to Rüdenau after the Inter Whiskey and stay 1 or 2 days longer to have a look at the textile factory and to figure out if we can transform it into a whiskey distillery.
Yeah.
And then I called up my friends here in Rüdenau who are part of the whiskey club Whiskey-Freunde Rüdenau. And they came here right to this spot. This is the campfire spot in Rüdenau, in our famous whiskey villa where we keep 1,000 bottles of whiskey and more, you know.
Yes, you have quite a... Does the fire officer know about how much whiskey?
No, they don't know about it, fortunately. So it's a quite big laboratory for whiskey. And you guided us through the whiskey collection and you selected some very nice drams. And I think we had like 25 drams before it was like the morning, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. And we are the two last men standing on left. I think you were more standing than I was, to be honest. You were trained even more than I was.
I had more years.
At least you were clear in your head. You were still able to calculate things and to make plans. I was just, I don't know, I was just dreaming and I was having visions, you know, and hallucinations about a whiskey distillery, obviously in Rüdenau.
That's the real entrepreneur, isn't it? With dreams and visions.
Somehow, in this early morning of that day in November, we decided, or you decided, that we build a whiskey distillery.
I got the distinct impression that you wanted to build one. I'm delighted to help.
That was a very special and funny night. And like you can see it, we made a little piece of art. You know, I just dug it out of my personal collection of memorabilia. I just get it. Oh, you got it, yeah. It's right here. So I wrote on a piece of paper. That was actually around midnight. And Bruce Springsteen came from the music box and sang his famous song, Dancing in the Dark. And, you know, the text goes, you can't start a fire without a spark. And that spark that happened on that night, that was the spark, you know, with the fire.
The spark between us.
So literally, we lighted a fire, we sparked it up, and that was the start of the entire thing. And maybe in 100 years or so, if you think in Japanese terms, they will say, okay, on that day in Rüdenau, the German whiskey industry was actually started, you know.
The real whiskey,
yeah.
The real whiskey industry.
And, you know, part of the story was also that story of the Irish monks. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Kilian, Colonnade and Tottenham.
Yeah.
They came from Ireland and you know what they did here.
Well, they were killed.
In the end, they were killed, to cut a long story short. But before, they brought the Aqua Vitae to the Frankenland, to Franconia. And it was basically, it was like a whiskey new make. And they gave it as a present to the king and to the queen and to the high people. Yeah. And they liked it so much that they decided not to kill the 3 monks immediately. They did it later on anyway, you know. But to have them produce a whole lot of whiskey.
It wasn't the product complaint then that caused the problem.
Right. Probably a product complaint, yeah. That's funny. I mean, a few weeks later, I came up with the name St. Kilian, you know. And I remember we had a telephone call and you said, so what do you want to call the whiskey distillery? And I thought Thümmler whiskey wouldn't be the right name, to be honest. So I came up with St. Kilian because this was an Irishman coming to Germany, teaching the Germans how to make a good whiskey new make, the Aqua Vitae.
But that's not what he was supposed to be doing, you know.
No, he was Christianizing,
he was supposed to be converting them.
Converting them to
not
Christians.
Getting them drunk.
But it was much easier, you know, with this good elixir, basically. Yes. And so the entire saga and the idea and the vision of St. Kilian started, really, you know.
Started that night.
Yeah, started.
I think it was brewing in your head, though.
Yes. Actually, you know, there are a few signs that I dug out that were also here, and we were showing to each other these signs. In particular, this one. It says, "Do it now. Sometime later becomes never."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I headed off to Scotland.
You changed your flight. Yeah. Actually, you were supposed to fly back to Dublin. You know. You changed your flight. You flew to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And you went to Forsyth, dear friends, and you placed the equipment orders right away.
Well, there was a long lead time. It was essential to work fast.
Yeah. No, I understand that. It was good, you know. You took the thing in your hand, you went up there, you started ordering the equipment and putting together the distillery. And if we wouldn't have done it now, back then,
maybe
we wouldn't have a whiskey distillery running, you know. It was just this kind of very powerful decision and desire to do it. And from my side, it was a vision, but from your side, it was becoming very realistic.
What? Point number 4 there.
Dream.
The dream,
The dream.
At number 4.
Okay, 4. Okay, you have to read it.
A wild fancy or hope. And that's what it was then.
A wild fancy
or hope.
Okay. Yes, yeah, that was the dream sign, yeah. And so, you see, all this stuff is quite old now. But I wanted to ask you something, David. I mean, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Irish whiskey industry because John Teeling, you know, whom you worked with for decades to form and to shape this kind of whiskey business in Ireland. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the story. Where did John come from? How did you meet him? How did you start up Cooley's?
Well, actually, it goes back a long way. We're both from the same place in Dublin, but he actually worked for a mining company and he's still in the same office, like 30 years later, that my brother was managing director of. So that's how I first met him. Then when he came along, what happened was he and another person looked at buying. It was a distillery. It was built in the 1930s and it was making alcohol from potatoes, but also from molasses. But it was completely uneconomic. It was owned by the government, so they closed it down and put it up for sale. So John, who was very, very interested in whiskey at this point, because when he was going to Harvard Business School, they used to meet in a pub called the Plough and the Stars, which is on Mass Avenue in Cambridge. It's still there. The pub is still there. I think there's a little plaque there commemorating John and this guy having a drink in the pub. And once again, it was another drunken night. So when this distillery came up for sale, John said, well, that's a good idea. And, you know, we could turn this into a whiskey distillery. What do you think? And I went up and took a look at it, and I said, yeah, you could. We can
wow.
Yeah, so that was... we used the distillation columns there. We bought second-hand pots which somebody had bought. Actually, they were sitting up in Belfast because the guy had bought the pots and then figured out, this is a long-term investment. You know, you're not going to see your money back in 12 and a half years, Andy. You know, you got to have a long.
Still working on it.
You're still putting money in. Yeah, so we got those pots and we put them in, and started the malt whiskey distillery, and then so at the time Irish distillers had a complete monopoly on whiskey production. There were just two distilleries.
Did it already belong to Pernod Ricard at that time?
Not at that stage. No, about that time. It was around that time, actually.
That was Jameson's.
Jameson. Middleton Distillery and Bushmills.
Okay.
Both belong to Irish.
Bushmills
and Bushmills both belong to Irish distillers.
Okay.
And they wouldn't supply anybody else. Okay, they wouldn't supply other brands. They wouldn't supply the supermarkets, retailer, own label, we would call it. And so basically we thought, John figured that, you know, there was kind of an open goal there because of their refusal to supply the retailers in particular. And, you know, the advantage of supplying the retailers is you don't have to spend millions on marketing because you just put a Tesco Irish whiskey, put it on a Tesco shelf, and you'll get 20%, 25% of Irish whiskey sales in Tesco just by doing that. Just by doing that, and you don't have to invest any money.
It sounds a little bit like Germany, Rewe and Edeka, actually.
Something like that, yeah. Okay. Well, we do, actually, we supplied Aldi and Lidl in Ireland, and we supplied Lidl for their Luxury for Allah in October, I think.
Okay, we do a project with Lidl online now, a test, So, David, do you mind me lighting up a cigar?
No, of course not.
Okay,
because whiskey and cigars go together, you know?
You know, I'm a cigar addict, actually, and we have very nice cigars here. I wanted to ask you, who was your first customer after you started up Cooley's?
The first product we had was Tyrconnell, so we started selling that, you know, to local off licenses and pubs. But the first big customer and the key was to our survival, to tell you the truth, was the retailer-owned label. And our very first customer was Sainsbury's in the UK.
Sainsbury's,
yeah.
Supermarket chain.
Supermarket chain, yeah. They did an advertising promotion for the product, which had the leprechauns in it and all that stuff, you know. Later on, we ended up supplying all of the UK supermarkets.
All of them, like Tesco, Sainsbury's,
as the Waitrose.
Waitrose.
We had, and Marks and Spencer's. We had 3 products in Marks and Spencer's.
Were you also at Harvey Nichols?
No. No, but we also supplied Von Fass actually here in Germany, and they had a place in London. Yeah,
that's interesting because that's like Rewe, Edeka, Globus, Tego. That's comparable to Germany. What we are doing right now, we are going to the premium supermarkets with our brand.
Yeah,
because we want everybody to be able to enjoy St. Kilian. You know, we want to be right next to the Glenfiddich and to the Jamesons.
Yeah, you belong there.
To the Glenmorangie. You know, we want to be in one line with these kind of whiskies.
Yes.
And then, of course, the Germans can decide to take the German whiskey, the whiskey made in Germany.
But you belong up there with those, and you're as good as any of them and better than some.
Oh, thank you, David. That's going down like oil, you know, I mean, from your mouth. I mean, thanks a lot. I mean, I want to come back to the campfire day because in the morning, actually, when I woke up, I was lying in the grass and everybody was gone. And obviously the fire was not burning so much anymore. Right. You were gone. And then I just forgot about everything. And a few weeks later, I got a call from my PA, from my assistant, Doris. And she said, "Hey, Andy, something weird is happening. Did you order something in Scotland?" I said, "What? No, I didn't order anything on Amazon or in Scotland." No, she said, "There's quite some significant bills coming in from Scotland." And I said, "Like what kind?" "Like pot stills, 2 copper pot stills, 6,000 litre, 480,000 pounds, prepayment for each." And she calculated, obviously, with a calculator. And she said, "Actually, we have more than 2 million euros in bills here on the desk." And and I said, "Okay, who ordered it? I didn't do that." Well, it was a guy called David F. Hynes. managing director of Thümmler GmbH, Thümmler Limited Company, you know, which, I said, no, I did. And she said, does this kind of company exist? Or do you know this guy? You know, should we call the police? I said, no, wait, don't call the police. I have to do a couple of phone calls. Something happened. And then in the evening of that day, I got hold of you, obviously, at home. And I could hardly ask you anything. And you said, Andy, I did exactly like we decided in the morning. We made a business plan at the campfire. And I went to Scotland straight away to place equipment orders and to start the biggest whiskey distillery in Germany. And then, you know, I started remembering, you know, that something must have happened, you know. You know, you kind of calmed me down. You took away all my worries and my fear. I asked you, so how much money will I have to pay? And you said, it could easily be like 5 million plus. And I said, okay, well, that's...
Did you not read the business plan?
No, we didn't. I didn't see the business plan up until today, you know. But you kind of calmed me down and you said, hey, don't worry, everything will be fine, you know, and I also take care of it and it's a great thing. And I thought, okay, he's a good guy and I trust you.
Thank you.
And I really like you. And
you also told you that if you didn't want to go ahead, we could sell the equipment at a profit, yes, because there's such a lead time.
That's right. I thought about, okay, we sell the pot stills with a markup of 20%, you know. Hey, that's not bad.
Without ever parting with, well, you'd have to part with the deposit money, but other than that, you'd get it back. But, you know, getting in the queue was why I acted so fast. Because
it takes years.
A couple of years delivery, yeah. A bit better now, but it was up to 3 years at one point. But a lot of people ended up buying, you know, alternative stills. For example, we now have about 40 distilleries in Ireland. We've had 40.
40.
You could say, to some extent, Cooley broke the mould. John is described as the father of the modern Irish whiskey because he broke the mould. Mm-hmm. He broke the monopoly.
He kind of restarted it.
He restarted it.
Revitalized the industry.
Well, he broke the monopoly,
yes,
you know. So, and nobody would do that because... You know, you say, I'm going to get into whiskey distilling. You know, it's 3 or 4 years between planning and everything else before you actually start making whiskey. And it's another 4 to 5 years before you can start selling it. You know, yes. So any financial analyst looking at this would say, you mean you're actually not going to have any sales for 10 years? Are you kidding?
Yes. Yeah, well, so, I know how it feels.
You have been there.
I've been through it, yes.
So he described himself as the father and me as the mother. And, you know, father has a moment of fun and the mother has to
raise the children.
But in 9 months at least.
Do all the hard work, yes. Coming back to Cooley's and to these days, actually, you know, when I came to Kilbeggan the first time.
Yeah.
You weren't the first person I bumped into. I remember there was a guy with a red nose in the warehouse.
That was, in Kilbeggan or in
Kilbeggan?
That would be Brian.
Ah, Brian, okay.
That would be Brian. In Cooley, the fellow you met was...
Eddie
Marmion.
Yes.
That's who you met in Cooley Distillery. Because we didn't actually do visitors.
Yes.
In Cooley. In Kilbeggan was.
I wanted to know where the famous peated whiskey Connemara is basically coming from. So that's why I wanted to go.
Well, we did a lot of in-depth market research into that, actually, you know. And, I mean, there was peated malt made, particularly in Northern Ireland, historically. Even Bushmills had made peated malt. But we did deep market research. And actually, what I did is I was speaking to Billy Walker, who guided us a lot in the early days. Billy, Scotch whisky, Glenallachie now.
Glenallachie now.
Glenallachie now. But he would be, you know, possibly the best blender in.
Okay. Wow.
And best blender in Scotland, and very good, very astute businessman in terms of buying stocks. One barrel he bought that he got in a distillery, he ended up getting a revenue of 600,000 from.
Okay.
Right? So
600,000 for one barrel, one cask of whiskey.
One cask of whiskey. Actually, I was speaking to Billy one day, and I said to him, what would you think about us making peated malt? And he said, I think that'd be a great idea, David. Now, this is how you should make it. This is the level of peating you should be looking for. So that was the beginning and the end of our market research.
Wow.
Well, the Connemara comes from my relatives of mine had a bog down in Connemara.
Okay.
And I remember working in the bog when I was a child, young, about 12 or 13-year-old, just to have something to do. The men, I got tea. The men got something different. And the tea, because the water was boiled over a turf fire, the tea actually tasted of peat. So, it's
That's
also,
how it started.
That's how we came up with the name Connemara.
That's the idea.
And there was a French singer, Johnny Hallyday, who sang the song Connemara. So that was a good name, good recognition, say, in the French market in particular, because of that song.
So I was like a turf head right from the beginning, because the first Scotch whiskey I ever drank was a Lagavulin 16.
Right, yeah.
So I thought that's like the holy grail of whiskey,
That was the PhD scheme.
Yeah, and so I became totally peated, And so this is how I detected Connemara. I thought, okay, there's the Isle of Islay, and you have all these great distilleries of peated whiskey like Bowmore and Lagavulin and Lafroy, Carlila, Bunnahabhain, you name it. And then I detected one in Ireland, which was called Connemara. Only that there is no distillery called Connemara. It's just the brand. It's the whiskey, and that's really why I wanted to go to Ireland. I haven't been to an Irish whiskey distillery before, and to be honest, I wasn't particularly interested in Kilbeggan or the oldest whiskey distillery in the world and these things. I just wanted to find out who the hell makes this peated Irish whiskey, So I found out that Connemara whiskey, actually, it's an Irish whiskey, obviously, but it's not triple distilled, it's double distilled.
Double distilled for flavor.
For flavor. Yeah. And heavily peated or peated. Well, it's lightly peated, but then the Turfmoor obviously is heavily peated.
Well, when we started with that, had been no peated Irish whiskey for decades, right? And in fact, peated whiskey was, Irish distillers were saying this is not right stuff. So we started off with 15 parts per million phenol.
Okay, 50 ppm. 15.
15.
1.5.
Yeah, 1.5. And we were getting that made in Ireland until the malting company put our whiskey in a silo. And then the next batch into the silo was for malted barley going to Guinness. So when Guinness got that truckload in and they smelt it, they said, "What have you done to our malted barley?" They said, "Never ever." So we had to go to England for it. And we were buying 15 parts per million. And then we decided what we would do is we were mashing in 15. So we bought in high peated, heavily peated, 55 parts per million phenol.
55.
55. And we brought that in and we would blend it then, with unpeated at the mash stage.
To get it down.
But then we would make a few mashes with 55. And that's
the Turfmoor.
That's how Turfmoor came about.
And now I'm thinking our St. Kilian peated whiskey actually starts at 54 ppm.
Yeah.
So would you consider that heavily peated, or?
That would be considered heavily, not very heavily peated, but heavily peated. Yeah, I think that's heavily peated enough. Okay. Because after that, you're starting to mask the other flavors. One of the things about is Connemara was, we won 2 gold medals the day. All the Irish drinks writers thought it was terrible stuff because they didn't understand peated whiskey. But we won 2 gold medals, and one of the things about it, it's the same distillation process as we have for the unpeated, like you have in St. Kilian. You have soft fruit that comes from your wooden fermenter.
Yes.
Cooley was more citrus. The basic malt was citrus, but we didn't want that to be masked, So we figured, but Turfmoor is a special case.
What would you say, David, is ultra heavily peated?
No.
Where does it start?
You can get some specialized from maltings for about 120, but you know, it's very high level, you know.
At St. Kilian, we tend to be between 90 and 100, 120, for ultra heavily peated.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
That's fine, yeah.
That is more than Turf Moor now.
I have particularly one whiskey edition at St. Kilian that I love. It's Judas Priest, heavy metal edition, called Ram It Down, ultra heavily peated. I really love that bottle, you know. Unfortunately, they didn't produce a lot of them, so most of it is consumed, you know. Yeah.
Well, you know, those ultra heavily peated malts are actually difficult to get because, you know, they've all the Scotch companies buy them all up and you just can't get them.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what happened then, or what happened later on. If I recall it right, is that Cooley's was bought up by Jim Beam, and Jim Beam was acquired
by Suntory.
Suntory from Japan, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So how did that feel for you? Or?
There's one brand I would have wished we could have held onto, and you don't need to guess what that one was.
Tyrconnell?
No, Connemara.
Connemara, of course. Okay,
yeah, because that was different. That was a special brand.
Yeah. After Jim Beam took over Connemara and Beam Connemara was taken over by Suntory.
Yeah.
John Teeling and you moved on, actually. So the two boys, he has two sons, obviously, Jack and Stephen.
Yeah.
They started up Teeling Whiskey.
In Dublin, yeah.
Spirit of Dublin, very nice new distillery. 3 beautiful frilly stills. Frilly pot stills from Italy. And they went quite quickly. They shot up and they did a deal with Bacardi. So today it belongs majority owned by Bacardi, but still, I think the Teeling guys have an active role in the management.
They do. Oh yeah, absolutely. No, they are still the operational management there. Mm-hmm. But you know, they have done these two boys have done a fantastic job.
Yes, yeah.
You know, other multinationals have gotten involved, like Brown-Forman and Diageo have gotten involved in Irish whiskey. These guys have done it far better in creating brand than Diageo with all their resources, and Brown-Forman with all their resources. So basically, you know, and just Bacardi saw this, and you know, and they will buy a brand, and that's what they buy, you know, because they've created a brand, you know, which is not a very difficult and normally time-consuming and expensive, that they've done brilliantly at creating that brand, and they've got its distribution available. You can get it in Vietnam, you know.
Yeah. I always realize at the duty-free store at Heinemann in Frankfurt Airport, it's full with Teeling whiskey. So
that's the kind of, you know, on-the-ground promotion, because you don't get in there. You have to pay to get into Heinemann, right? Yeah. But it's the visibility that gives you.
We just did a deal with Heinemann, St. Kilian, and we start with Heinemann pretty soon. So watch out for more. And pretty much at the same time, the father, John Teeling Sr., and you, you were actually supposed to retire and go to the Côte d'Azur and keep your mouth shut. But you did the opposite. You started up Great Northern Distillery in Dundalk. What's that? I mean, that's a huge thing. I mean,
it's the second largest distillery. Now, it was a different... In Ireland.
Okay.
It was a brewery, and so they were closing it down and consolidating. They were making Hop Lager, which was, by the way, it was a German beermeister who actually went over there and chose that location. It was an old brewery making ale-type breweries. A
Guinness brewery, right? Oh.
Guinness had bought it,
and
it was sitting idle, and the lager started to come into Ireland. Guinness didn't know how to make a lager. Right?
Okay.
So they hired a German brewmaster from Köln who came over, and he looked at various sites, and he chose the Harp site, the Dundalk site, because of the water.
Ah, okay.
Because it was soft water coming down from the mountain. And the reason it was being brought down from the mountain was because it was the railroad company wanted soft water for their steam engines. Okay. So they put in a pipeline all the way from the hills.
Oh, and you used that pipeline?
The Cooley Hills, actually, funny enough.
Okay.
And down into town.
Cool.
So we used that water for our processing but they chose it. They put in the pipe because they needed soft water for a steam engine.
G&D is like a B2B distillery, so
That's
you don't
the business model.
You don't have your own brands. You
No.
deliver to other brands.
We supply bulk.
You supply bulk. You have like 130, 140 customers.
130, 140. But of course, like anybody else, it's there's 10 customers, who account for 80% of your business.
Bud Spencer and Terence Hill whiskey, one of them.
Well, no one's a big, no, I'm afraid not.
But still small, but watch out, we're getting bigger, bigger.
You're not in the top 10 yet.
Not yet, but we're working hard.
We supplied UFill to Diageo, to Brown-Forman, particularly in grain. That's what the model was, to make grain, because grain plants have to be big and continuously operated, where pot stills can be small and, you can turn them on, turn them off, but grain plants kind of need to run, and they're a lot of more capital than a little pot still distillery. So that was the model to supply these people, because the only people who've built another grain plant. There's two other grain plants now. There's 5 grain plants now. Grant's built one, but that would be Grant's in Tullamore, for Tullamore. They would have to have their own supply. That's why they built Girvan. They built Girvan because so they would be always build that. There's also, Cinzaro bought a small grain plant, which was not very efficient. I think they've improved that. And then there's Middleton, which is huge.
Talking about Bud Spencer and Terence Hill whiskey, the idea was really to create a blended whiskey. 20% St. Kilian, high character, very rich, Amarone casks, rum casks, and using 80% from G&D, from Great Northern Distillery.
Bourbon cask. Yeah.
Yes, the triple distilled Irish whiskey, which gives the whiskey, the blend, a kind of mild note, So it's really for whiskey beginners or for people who are not so connected with whiskey, but who want to start it, and who are interested and who use it for cocktails and who just enjoy it as an easy drink, Yeah. And so we are one of the customers of G&D today. So we cooperated, I called you up. I said, hey, David, can you help us? Can you supply us some? I said, oh no, we have a long waiting list of 100 customers, but okay, can see what I can do. And we are in business now, and I'm very glad that we are doing it again,
Yeah, well, one of the things we did, and we did it in Cooley whiskey, we left flavour in our grain. I mean, we distilled it, and you could, if you're triple distilling using those 3 columns, you can actually remove all of the amyl alcohols and and propanols and isobutanols. But you want to leave them a certain amount in, right? Otherwise, you end up with kind of like a slightly off-flavoured vodka, and we did that deliberately in Cooley because we knew we wanted the grain. Otherwise, we would be selling a diluted malt, and we did the same in G&D. Okay. We wanted grain with flavour and with character of its own, so it wasn't just extending the malt. So and that's what you've got that. Yeah. Because the grain does contribute.
Yeah, we're very happy. I mean, what we hear from our fans and customers is really great, and we will keep expanding that part of the business. And maybe one final thing or one final question that comes up: why didn't you guys ever do anything with gin? Because a lot of whiskey distilleries, especially at the beginning, seem to start like with a gin or with a gin brand, and you never went into that.
You mean in Cooley or in
Cooley in particular, but maybe also later on at G&D?
Well, we do have a gin still, but we do have a small gin still, and we do produce some gins for other people.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we did. I didn't know that.
We don't.
Okay, well, maybe we can start another business.
Gin is not a very capital-intensive business. It's not like
has low market entry barriers. Yeah.
Yes, and it doesn't have all that 4 or 5 years of aging.
Yes.
Yes.
So I don't know if you knew this, but we will come up with our first gin, which will be a Bud Spencer gin.
Yeah.
And it will have aromas from Italy, from the Amarone grapes, and things like this. So it's very authentic. Actually, yesterday I was trying it for the first time, to be honest, and I was really, really amazed, you know. Before I started drinking whiskey or getting into whiskey, which was a long time ago, I really drank gin and gin tonics. And I remember that was the time when Bombay Sapphire came up and all these things, you know. And so I think there's a lot of room to move and to do things here in Germany and to shape the industry and to do things. But of course, the guiding principle is always quality and to create an outstanding product. First of all, in terms of quality, you know, I mean the content, but also the look and feel is very important, you know, so that the customer has the bottle and the brand and how does it look like, how does it feel, how can I hold it in my hand? All these things count, you know. And
you're right about one thing, quality. If you don't have quality, you don't have anything.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, when we were in Cooley, we didn't produce inferior whiskey for the supermarket. We produced the best product.
The best whiskey for the supermarket. Yeah.
Not some kind of inferior product because there was only supermarket.
Yeah,
right?
Great. David, every interview has an end. We could talk endlessly, obviously. It's so great to have you here in Germany and that you share all your experience and the stories and what you did in the past. And we can learn a lot from this. I mean, I'm always listening very well. I wish that you come back to Germany many more times, that you keep supporting us for our endeavor, whiskey made in Germany. You know, maybe one day it will be as big as whiskey made in Japan.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
no
that would be a nice goal.
No
and thanks a lot and to good health. Slanchiva.
Slancha.
To you, David. Thank you very much.
And you, Andy. Without you, nothing.